Deep in the forest, there lived a man who could not wait. His wife had died, yet the spirits gave her back to him, with only one condition. He broke it, and because of that, he lost her twice. This is the story of the man who held a shadow. Long ago, there lived a man and his wife. Their hut stood under the tall iroko trees, far away from the noise of the tribe. The man was a hunter, tall and strong, and his wife, though gentle, walked beside him in the forest paths with a bow in her hand. They hunted together, and in the evenings they sat by the fire telling tales of spirits and ancestors. But in time, the wife's hands grew full with the endless duties of a home. She cooked, she mended, she pounded yam, she fetched water, she smoked the meat. Soon she could no longer follow her husband into the forest, as she once did. And when he went hunting alone, it seemed as though the animals fled from him. For never once did he return with the same fortune as when she was by his side. One morning, the woman could not rise from her mat. Her head was heavy, her body burned like fire, and her voice grew faint. The husband brought herbs from the forest and made medicine, but her strength did not return. Each day she became weaker. The man prayed to the spirits of the forest, he whispered to the ancestors, he even left food by the river for mercy. But nothing helped. His wife's eyes closed at last, and her breath stopped. The forest became silent to him. The man carried his wife's body inside their hut. He dug the ground in the corner where she used to sit, and with his own hands, he laid her to rest. He covered her with earth and placed her calabash and cooking spoon beside her, for he could not bear to let her go empty. He cried until his chest ached, and his voice grew hoarse. Day after day, he sat by the fire alone, staring at the place where she used to smile at him. His hut, once filled with warmth, now felt cold. Loneliness ate at his heart like a sickness. He could no longer bear the silence. One day, he cut down a tree and shaped the wood with his knife. Slowly, carefully, he carved a figure the height of his wife. He smoothed the face, tied cloth around it, and dressed it in her clothes. When he placed it by the fire, it almost looked as if she had returned. He sat across from it and spoke, pretending his wife still answered. Though it was only wood, it comforted him a little. Days turned into moons, and moons into a full year. The man hunted alone, cooked alone, mended his torn clothes, and spoke to the wooden doll at night. Sometimes, when he came home, he brushed ashes from its face as if it were alive. But no voice answered him. No hand touched his. Only the sound of the fire kept him company. One evening, after a long day of hunting, the man dragged his tired feet back to the hut. He expected the same silence, the same cold ashes in the fireplace. But when he reached his door, something was different. A neat bundle of firewood rested by the entrance, tied with twine. Inside, the hearth was already burning, flames licking the dry sticks. The man froze. He had not gathered any wood that morning, and he knew no visitor had come. The forest was too far from the rest of the people. His heart pounded. He searched the shadows of the hut, peered behind the trees, and even called out into the night air. No one answered. The forest kept its silence. From that night, he could not stop wondering, who had done this? The next evening, the mystery deepened. He returned from the hunt again, empty-handed as usual. Yet when he pushed open the door of his hut, the smell of cooked meat filled his nose. On the fire, a pot simmered. He lifted the lid and found fresh venison stew, steaming and ready. His stomach rumbled, but his mind raced faster than his hunger. Who had entered his home? Who had kindled his fire? He ate the food cautiously, half expecting it to vanish with the first bite. But it was real, tender and warm, just as his wife once cooked for him. The man did not sleep that night. He lay awake, staring into the dark, waiting for footsteps, listening for whispers. Yet no sound came, only the endless hum of crickets. By the third day, his curiosity had turned into sharp suspicion. He decided to set a trap, not with snares or ropes, but with his eyes. Instead of going far into the forest, he hid among the trees not far from the hut. At sunset, the man's eyes grew heavy, but suddenly he saw movement. From the path came a woman, carrying firewood neatly on her head. She walked straight to his hut as though she belonged there. His heart nearly burst from his chest. She looked like his wife, her walk, her shoulders, even the cloth tied at her waist. He rubbed his eyes, thinking grief had tricked him. But no, she was real. Quiet as a leopard, he rushed forward and pushed open the door before she could vanish. There by the fire she sat. Not the wooden doll, but his wife, flesh, face, and smile. She turned her head slowly, and her eyes met his. "My husband," she said, her voice soft. The man trembled. He wanted to run to her, to hold her, but fear kept him still. His heart screamed that this could not be, for he had buried her with his own hands. Yet she looked alive, and her presence warmed the hut again. Tears fell from his eyes as he whispered her name. She raised her hand gently, stopping him before he rushed to her side. "Do not touch me yet," she said. "Listen. The Great Spirit looked upon your sorrow and had pity on you. He saw that you could not be comforted, so he allowed me to return. But you must obey one law. Do not lay your hands upon me until we have seen our people again. If you touch me before that time, I will be lost forever." The man nodded, though his heart ached. To see her alive and not hold her was a pain sharper than a hunter's spear. Still he agreed, for fear of losing her again. From that day, the wife lived once more in the hut. She fetched firewood, she cooked, she kept the home alive. Yet when her husband sat beside her, there was always a space between them, like a shadow that could not be crossed. The days that followed were strange and filled with wonder. The hut, once empty and silent, now echoed with the sounds of life. The woman moved about as she once did, pounding yam with her pestle, washing calabashes by the stream, and singing softly to herself. But though she lived with him, there was a boundary like a thin line of smoke between them. She never let him touch her. If his hand brushed hers by accident, she would step back quickly. If he leaned too close, she would turn her face away. The man tried to be content. He told himself that her presence was enough, that hearing her voice and seeing her smile should fill the hole in his heart. Yet at night, when the fire burned low, he stared at her shadow dancing on the wall and longed to hold her as before. With each passing night, the hunter's heart grew heavier. He loved his wife deeply, but love without touch was like a drum without sound. He would watch her kneel by the fire, stirring the pot, the flames lighting her face, and his arms would ache to wrap around her. At night, he would dream of her lying beside him, warm and real. But when he awoke, there was only the space between them, wide as a river. Still, he remembered her warning. He feared losing her forever, so he clenched his fists and endured the hunger of his heart. Seasons came and went. Rains fell, harvests ripened, harmattan winds blew. 2 full years had passed since the woman first returned. One evening, as they sat by the fire, the man spoke. His voice trembled, though he tried to be firm. "My wife, it is now 2 years since you died. We have lived here alone, hidden from the tribe. But the time has come. Let us return to our people. Then you will be made whole, and I will no longer fear. Only then will I hold you without danger." The woman looked at him with gentle eyes. For a moment, it seemed she wished to argue, but at last she nodded. "Yes, it is time." The next morning, the man rose early. He prepared for the journey, for the camp of the tribe was 6 days' walk from their forest hut. He dried strips of deer's flesh and tied them into bundles. One he gave to his wife, and one he kept for himself. He packed sleeping skins, flint stones for fire, and gourds of water. When all was ready, he looked at his wife. She stood there, dressed in her traveling cloth, the bundle of meat on her head. Her eyes shone with hope, yet behind them lay something else, fear, like a shadow hiding in the light. Still, they set out together, leaving behind the lonely hut that had held both death and wonder. The forest paths were wide and endless. Birds cried above their heads, and monkeys leapt from branch to branch, chattering as if they knew a secret. The man walked in front, his bow slung across his shoulder, while his wife followed quietly, her steps soft as falling leaves. At night, they rested by rivers and cooked meat over small fires. The man spoke of the joy of seeing his people again, of how they would marvel when they saw his wife alive. She listened but said little, her face half lit by the flames. On the third night, as the fire died down, The man thought he saw her shadow move strangely, thin, almost breaking apart, like smoke carried by the wind. But when he blinked, she was sitting there as always, steady and calm. He told himself it was only his tired eyes, yet unease stirred within him, a whisper he could not silence. By the fourth night of their journey, the forest began to change. The air grew colder, and the trees stood tall like silent watchers. When they lit their fire, the flames bent strangely. The man thought he heard footsteps in the distance, though no one was there. Once, he turned sharply and saw two small lights glowing like eyes behind the trees. But when he stood, bow in hand, they vanished into the dark. His wife sat quietly, feeding the flames. Her face was calm, yet her shadow trembled on the wall of trees, stretching and shrinking as if it did not belong to her. The man shivered but said nothing. By the fifth day, the air was heavy with clouds. Snow began to fall from the sky, soft at first, then thick and endless. It covered the ground, swallowed their footprints, and wrapped the world in silence. The man's shoulders ached, his bundle of meat heavy. His wife walked behind him, her pace slower now, her steps deep in the snow. She looked tired, though she never complained. That night, they found shelter beneath a great tree whose roots rose like walls. They lit a fire, and the snow hissed as it melted near the flames. For a while, warmth returned, but the man noticed his wife's face looked pale, as if the fire could not touch her skin. They spread their skins on the ground and cooked strips of meat. The smoke rose into the white sky, curling like a signal to unseen spirits. The man chewed slowly, his eyes never leaving his wife. She sat close to the fire, her arms wrapped around herself. Every now and then, she glanced at him, and in her gaze was both love and warning. The forest was silent, too silent. No birds called, no branches cracked. Only the fire's crackle and the soft fall of snow filled the air. The man felt the weight of her nearness pressing against his heart. When they lay down to rest, the man turned toward her. His heart thudded like a drum. He whispered, "We are close. Only one more day, and we will be among our people. Why must I still wait?" She shook her head slowly. "Not yet, my husband. The promise is not yet fulfilled. We have not reached the tribe. If you touch me now, all will be lost." Her words were gentle but firm, like a mother warning her child. She turned her face away, her shadow long and strange in the firelight. The man sighed deeply, pressing his hands into the skin mat beneath him. But the fire in his chest did not die. The night grew colder. Snowflakes drifted onto their skins, melting into tiny drops of water. The man could not sleep. He watched his wife's back, the curve of her shoulders, the way her breath misted in the air. His longing, buried for 2 years, rose like a flood. The memory of her touch burned stronger than her warning. He thought, "We are close enough. What difference will one night make?" Slowly, he reached out his arms. His breath quickened, his hands trembling with desire. He ignored the voice of caution, ignored the words of the spirits. In that moment, he wanted only his wife, warm, alive. At last, the man's longing overpowered his fear. With a deep breath, he leaned forward and wrapped his arms around his wife. For a heartbeat, he felt her form, soft, warm, alive. Relief and joy rushed through him like a river breaking its banks. But then her body stiffened. Her warmth drained away. The face he pressed against his chest grew cold and lifeless. The man gasped, pulling back in horror. In his arms was no woman. It was the wooden doll, the same one he had carved in his grief, dressed in her old clothes, its painted face smeared with ashes. The man cried out, his voice echoing through the snowy forest. He pushed the doll from him, stumbling backward as if it had bitten him. The truth struck his heart like a spear. He had broken the Great Spirit's command. His wife was gone forever. Mad with sorrow, he left the doll where it lay and ran through the snow. His feet carried him like the wind until he reached the camp of his people. Breathless, he burst into their gathering and told his story. How his wife had returned, how she had warned him, and how his foolishness had turned her back into wood. Some people shook their heads in disbelief. Others whispered in fear, for such things were spoken of only in old tales. Yet the grief in the man's eyes was too deep to be a lie. A group of elders followed him back to the place where he had left the doll. The snow still lay thick, untouched except for two sets of footprints leading to the fire. One trail was human, strong and clear. The other was strange. Its marks were flat, stiff, shaped like the feet of a wooden doll. There by the ashes, they found the figure lying still. It was no woman, only wood, lifeless and cold. The man fell to his knees and wept. His tears froze on the snow, but he did not care. His wife, the woman he loved, was gone a second time, this time forever. From that day, he carried his sorrow like a burden. He never laughed again, never sang, never danced among his people. The elders told his story around the fire to warn the young. When the spirits show mercy, do not be impatient. Blessings vanish when men cannot wait. And so the tale lived on, passed from mouth to mouth, year to year, of the man who held a shadow and lost the one he loved because he could not wait one more day.